All right. Michael, do you want to take it away?
Yep, thanks, Alan. So, good evening. My name is Mike Pavek. Some of you know me, but my background was I was in the Army for 22 years, and then I retired out of the Army in 2018, and I did my own transition into a product manager role. The background that I had in the Army includes about 10 years of logistics experience, as well as the last decade and a little plus was spent doing modeling and simulation, helping develop and manage things like the Army's suite of flight simulators, driving simulators, video game lines, and these types of things. And so it was kind of a unique challenge when I made that transition because there was a lot of experiences that didn't necessarily match up on a one-to-one basis. But one thing that matched up really well was the product management background that I had. And then I started working for a company called MTS Systems, which has product management roles and does modeling and simulations. And particularly, I became a product manager for a virtual reality driving simulator. So what we were talking about is having a series of speeches or series of presentations on what different roles are and what does it mean. Because one of the big challenges when you're transitioning, especially coming out of active duty, is that you aren't exposed to the whole plethora of positions out there. So it's really easy just to fall back on some comfort zone or some area position that you're comfortable with without really fully understanding the job market. And so what we wanted to do was take a look at different positions and explain what that position does, what are the key, skills, knowledge, and attributes needed for it, and really why veterans make a good fit for this job. So this is the first one of a series, and for anybody else out there, if you're interested in presenting, please contact me or Alan or go to the sign-up sheet and just sign up. But we can talk about it either way afterwards. So let me get started on this side here, and I'll share my screen. Okay, is that working for everybody? Great. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is why veterans make great product managers. And so let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. And so really, kind of what we were talking about was the goal of this whole series and this particular presentation is to introduce vets to, in this case, the product management. What are those competencies needed, and what are the unique attributes and values that veterans bring to the field that help make us competitive? And so for our agenda, it's a pretty straightforward agenda. We're just going to, whoops, I'm going to go back. No, we're going to go back. We're just going to talk about what is product management and what does a product manager do. We're going to talk about the KSAs, and then we're going to really talk about getting that military to job position fit, how to prepare for the role, and why veterans are good candidates. So this is a discussion, not just a presentation. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to speak up, either put them in the chat, and Alan can read them off, or just go ahead and just speak up as we go through. Okay, so first of all, what is product management? So when we think of products, sometimes you think of a physical thing. Maybe you're thinking of like your phone, which doesn't show up. Maybe you're thinking like of your phone, or maybe you're thinking of a software product. But really, a lot of things can be considered a product. It can be a physical thing. It can be a service. It could be a piece of code, like a program. So the goal of product management is each one of these products have a lifespan and a life cycle where they're introduced, they're developed, they're introduced to the market, they start to grow, and then they eventually mature, and then they decline. So there's a whole life cycle for that. And so what a product manager really does is he really takes that product and manages it and guides it throughout the life cycle of that product, and ensuring that it's profitable, ensuring that it meets the customer's requirements. The product manager will take a look at the features and adjust it over time in light of what the customers are asking for, in light of what the competition is doing, all sorts of these things. So really, when you think about it, and we all deal with products, whether we're talking about a car, big product with a lot of subcomponents in there, or whether you're talking about even just listening to Spotify, or when you're looking on Netflix. We are surrounded by products all the time. And so it's really a very central role. So there's something called product managers, and there's also something called product owners. You'll hear product owners a lot in terms of software, And so at the bottom of this, you can see that a product owner has a final authority to represent the customer's interest in backlog prioritizations and requirements. And so really what that means is that a product owner is a little bit more focused on the internal portion of the product development and management. And the product manager is a little more focused on the market facing and the customer side. I got a couple of images that will help kind of explain that as we go through. So when you're looking at a product, there's three big things that you're going to be working through: vision, strategy, and execution. So when we think about it, vision, what do we want that product to be? Where do we want to see it positioned in the market? What do we want? How is it going to meet the needs of the customers? Where do we see its future state? And then the strategy is kind of how are we going to get there? What kind of market research do we need to do? What kind of our research and development and innovations are we going to need to do? And we start putting that in something called a roadmap. So every product has a roadmap. For example, I don't know if they have yet or are going to, but Apple is getting ready to announce their iPhone 12. And so in order for them to get to the point where they can announce it and show all these features, they have to have a roadmap that will get them from concept to being able to finally present it to people, and then you actually get it to the market too. And so the product managers are heavily involved in laying out that roadmap. And what they do is they do a lot of research, as well as some inspiration on what the customer wants, needs, and how to get it to them. And then they lay those features out and prioritize them. And then they pursue funding and there's other stuff for that. But that's pretty much what a roadmap does. So it's a guideline or a path from the beginning state to the end state, or a continually improving state. And then lastly, you have execution. So when we think about execution, there's everything that goes from the sales to actually developing the features or the additions or the product itself, to the service afterwards. So when you look at a lot of products, let's talk about a car. When you buy a car, one big thing is what is going to be the service package in the car? How often am I going to have to take it in for services? What kind of deal will the dealership give me for doing services? Or what should I go to a third party service provider? And so the service piece is just as big of a part of a product as the initial sales, as the actual products and the features that come out into it. And so product manager gets involved in all of those different things. So a lot of times with product management, you'll hear that the product manager is a mini CEO sitting at the intersection of user experience, technology, and business. That's kind of true, and that's kind of not true all at the same time. The reality is that a lot of product managers or product owners don't have a lot of direct reports versus a CEO who does. But nevertheless, you are involved in all of these three pieces. And so as veterans, sometimes you'll hear, well, I'm not that technical, or I know some business, but I'm not an expert at business. Or I'm very familiar with this kind of need or this kind of market, but I'm probably not specialized enough. Well, being a product manager really lets you sit in the middle and kind of work through. And it's really interesting because in product management, you'll get a lot of people from different backgrounds. You might get somebody coming from an engineering background, which is heavy on the tech side, but they have limited business experience. You might have somebody coming from the UX or design side, and they have very, very limited tech experience. And so as a veteran, you're coming in too from a different point of view, but pretty much all the product managers, there's no such a thing as a perfect product manager. And so a lot of the product managers or PMs like to think of themselves as they're in the middle of those three. But in reality, where product managers actually sit is, yes, they're in the middle of these three sections, but really they're in the middle of the product and the customer itself. And when I saw this Venn diagram, I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, oh, that is such a perfect encapsulation of what you think, because it can be really easy to be so customer focused that you forget about the product side. So in other words, you can forget about the fact that you might have to make a profit, that you might have to actually be able to deliver the features that you promise. On the other hand, you can be so product focused that you forget about the customer itself. So you become so focused on the engineering of the product that you start to engineer it perfectly, except it no longer meets the customer demand or customer requirements. So your job is to keep that balance back and forth. And a lot of vets, you see this all the time because they really do have to balance these things out throughout their career. So it's a good fit. Okay, so what are some KSAs, or knowledge, skills, and attributes needed to be a product manager? Okay, so I've listed some, and it really depends because there's a lot of different products that you could be in charge of. You could be in charge of a pure software piece of software. You can be in charge of a manufactured piece of electronics. You can do automotive. The sky is literally the limit. So these are some kind of common ones. So let's talk about the first one, business understanding. So you saw a couple slides earlier where that product manager or that PM has to have at least 1 foot in the business world. So here's a story from my job. Is coming out of the Army, it was really important when you work with a lot of different organizations that you had to get alignment. You had to get people energized to be able to work and contribute and work with you for any sort of project or any sort of product or capability that you develop. And so when I started my job at MTS, I got all the engineers aligned on some changes that we were going to make to our simulator. I was super pumped up. And I went and talked to the vice president of product management. And he said, that's great, Mike, but does it make business sense? And I was like, well, what do you mean? Because I got the engineers excited about it. And if they're excited, then our customers will be excited about it. And he reminded me, he said, yes, Mike, but your engineers would be happy to test out the laws of physics if they could. And it's your job to make sure that what we're doing and the money that we invest will actually make us money in return. And it was this great mentoring moment that was very helpful for me in the early part of my time at MTS. And so having that business understanding is pretty key. The next one is understanding data. So we hear this all the time through everywhere. Show me the data. I want to make data-based decisions. I want to, see the data to understand the situation. So one thing you're going to have to do as a PM is really to be comfortable with data and be able to interpret it correctly. Lots of different ways. You got to figure out how to gather data, whether we gather data on our customers or whether we gather data on our competitors. This next one's a little bit trickier, industry insights. So this may or may not be able to be applicable depending on where you're coming from. So the more you know about an industry going into a job interview, into a discussion, the better. It's something that can be taught though too when you enter the position, but it certainly does make you a stronger candidate coming in. Strategic planning. So one of the things, and I talked briefly about a roadmap and all these features and other things that you have to do to determine how you want to get there from where you're starting at with your product. There's a lot of strategic planning to that because there's also a lot of resource management that you have to do, whether we're talking about resources in terms of people or whether we're talking resources in terms of funding, as well as prioritization. So being able to demonstrate that you have a skill to prioritize, to plan, to see the big picture is a huge bonus. And then I've got technical enough. So I see a lot of consternation about people saying, well, I'm not a programmer, so I don't think I can do software. Or I don't have necessarily a design background, so I can't come into this position. The trick isn't to be the technical expert as a product manager. It certainly helps, but the real trick is, and the real goal that you're looking for is to be technical enough to be able to understand the situation, help develop course of actions, and then select those courses of action. So you don't have to know all your coding necessarily to be a software product manager, but you do have to know enough to be able to speak intelligently to both customers and internally. So there's a balance on that. And so when you're looking at the education, well, we'll talk about that in a few seconds, but that's something to keep in mind as you might need to strengthen that. In terms of attributes that you're looking at, so I got collaborative, communicative, and customer focus. These big C's are pretty critical. And if you're looking at a vet, especially on collaboration and communication, a very, very strong background. The customer focus may or may not be. So it's kind of interesting because different branches of the service, as well as different MOSs within each one of those branches, have a differing level of customer focus. So if you're in a support branch, you're always focused on providing customer support. And that customer support is most likely to the warfighter. Depending on the branch of service, if you're Air Force and you're not on the fighter side, but maybe you're on the transport side, you tend to be very focused on customers. But even in the combat arms side, we all have to do our time where we're both the supported and the supporting effort. So you're always thinking of customer focus, but you might not think of it in those terms. So as you make that transition, it's good to kind of re-centralize that focus toward a customer mindset. And the last attribute is thick-skinned, because anybody who's done customer-facing roles knows that their customers are awesome, and customers can also be very demanding. And so you've got to be able to have a thick enough skin that you won't take those critiques personally, but also be receptive enough that you'll be able to understand and be able to make those changes. As far as education and certification, so I kind of talked about it earlier. There's people coming from all sorts of different educational backgrounds, all sorts of work experience backgrounds into product management. In fact, I actually wrote a book for if you are coming in from this background, here's some things that you should do to become a stronger PM. So that's okay to have those backgrounds. There's no one set educational background that will necessarily secure the jobs. It really just kind of goes from job to job. Similarly, there's no singularly recognized certificate for product management. So if you got project management, you have the PMP certification is considered kind of universal within the United States. For product management, there's several different ones. I've listed a couple ones. They come from different organizations. I think the new product development professional comes from the PDMA. The CPO is probably the most common that you'll see, the certified product owner. So there's that. Okay, so really, why do veterans make good product managers? And we kind of talked about this a little bit as we went, but I want to kind of really hit it here now. It's strategic thinking. So a lot of vets, when you think about it, the very mission that you're doing, defending the nation, is at a strategic level. But also, it's really kind of how do we apply that strategy? How do we build that strategy, and how do we apply that strategy? And because we come from a military background, we know that in order to actually make something happen from a plan, we need strong execution skills. So when we're developing the plan, we need to make sure that the plan is executable, and then when we're executing it, we need to make sure that that plan is achieving its strategic objectives. And that's something that we generally do all the time, even in just a basic op order format. You're going to see what is the commander's intent. And then that kind of says whether we were successful in our mission or not. And so very, very similar. The other thing about execution skills, we're very good at maintaining schedule. We're good at making sure that we meet the mission objectives, and we're good at making sure that we take care of each other. Customer focused, I talked about that just a few minutes ago, but it's really about taking care, making sure that we support the main effort. And so when you're thinking about this, I was talking to a guy who was a field artillery guy, and he said, I have nothing to bring to the table on this. He goes, I'm a field artillery guy. I make big cannons go boom. And I talked to him, I said, one way to look at this is that by the very nature of being a field artillery, you are providing support. You are delivering packages. You're in package delivery mode. It's just those packages explode. But you're working closely with your customer on timing, on the effect, on how you support the changes of their courses of action. So you're constantly customer focused, and that's for every branch and every MOS in the service. We're constantly focused on the customer. We just have to make ourselves think that way. Another one is lifelong learners. So the military provides so much education. So you get into a mode where you're just, in fact, you expect to go back to some sort of training or some sort of school on a regular basis. And that's hugely important because you're going to come in, if you remember those 3 Venn diagrams of UX, tech, and business, you're not going to be an expert at any of those. Or you might be an expert at one of those, but you certainly won't be an expert at all of them. So the fact that you're a lifelong learner and that you can demonstrate that you're a lifelong learner goes a long ways into making the employers and the hiring managers feel a lot more comfortable with you as a potential candidate. The next one is cross-functional leadership. So Cross-functional leadership, and I listed some of the things down here. So this is some of the things you might find in a CFT for as a PM. You have a group of engineers, you're gonna have a group of sales and business developers, you're gonna have some people that are working on the marketing plan and how to communicate it to the customers as well as to the competitors. You're gonna be having people that are gonna be doing the actual execution, whether we're talking about R&D projects, whether we're talking about customer delivery, whether we're talking about installation, all sorts of projects going on. Depending on the product you have, you may have to be involved with the supply chain too. And the whole supply chain, that's another whole presentation in of itself of why product managers make great supply chain analysts and managers. And then lastly, we kind of talked about the service. So this is one example of a cross-functional team that you might work on. And as vets, we always work very regularly with people from multiple MOSs. It's very rare that you're only surrounded by your MOS, especially as you get higher and higher in ranks. And so what is important about that is that you're able to take everybody's different organizational druthers, their kind of goals, as well as their background. So if you've worked with a bunch of infantry guys and then sat in a room full of a bunch of loggies, they may be very different in terms of their culture, in terms of their personalities and everything else. And so you're able to align all those different organizations and all point them in the same direction at the same time to achieve results. Okay. So how to prepare for this role. So some of this is just the very basics. Big first one is just networking and doing informational interviews. If you're interested in a product management role, if you're interested in just seeing how things are made, how things are designed, then just start reaching out and asking for informational interviews. Certifications. So I showed a couple certifications in the previous slide. It's worth taking a look at, especially if you're real serious about this. As far as reading, reading list, I listed a couple books here that are actually really good. Clayton Christensen is considered the gold standard in terms of innovation. Crossing the Chasm talks about that adoption cycle. So normally you have like the early adopters, the laggards, and everybody in between. And so it talks about being able to take a product and be able to jump that chasm from state to state. So one of the things that people sometimes want to avoid is I don't want to get any of these books that say for dummies because I'm not a dummy. Well, that's absolutely true. You're not. But the product management for dummies book is actually really, really good because it lists a lot of the tools and just the overall process that you go through in order to go manage the product lifecycle. And so what's really nice is as you go into these interviews, they're going to start asking you sometimes about the tools. What kind of, do you like to use Scrum? What kind of Kanban, software do you like to use? So on and so forth. How do you show your roadmap? And so reading something like Product Management for Dummies kind of helps you understand what those tools are and allows you to do more research. Then there's the industry-specific piece. And this is sometimes the biggest challenge for you when you're coming out of the service because you may not be that familiar with any specific industry. So you might not have a background in retail. You might not have a background in automotive development. You might not have any of these backgrounds. So how do you get smart on this before you start having these conversations? So some of these have industry-specific news journals. So like one of the things I work on is tire development, specifically testing of tires. And so there's actually websites and news websites that talk specifically about tire testing technology. And that's true for a lot of different things, and a lot of those are free. And so as a reminder, the best thing the best way to approach this isn't to try to learn everything in one day or in one sitting. Rather, subscribe to some of these journals, subscribe to some of these newspapers, and take it one bite at a time, one bite per day, and just water drip it until you start to become real familiar with this. So the further out from your transition you can start this process, the stronger you're going to be coming into your transition self on specific industries. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how to read a Form 10K. And this is a great way to get insight into an industry as well. The Form 10K is a SEC filing that really is an annual report of the company's financials. But they also talk about the things like their risks. They talk about their business organizational structure. They talk about a whole bunch of different things. And so you'll be able to learn a lot. So if you're interested, for example, if you're getting ready to go into a conversation with Target, you can read Target's 10K, as well as maybe read Amazon's and Walmart's, because then that'll give you an idea to be able to talk about both the target itself as well as its competitors. And so kind of using those to help prepare you, and you get good insight into the industry itself, and you also get to see the trends that have been occurring in the industry. And then the last piece is to take a look at a number of different job postings for that type of position, especially if it's in like one specific industry. So let's talk software for a second. So if you're interested in being a product owner, take a look at multiple product owner job postings. And what you're going to find is you're going to start seeing those common KSAs that are necessary, those common things that the employers are looking for. So as you're preparing for your transition, you'll know this is where I need to really start focusing on in order to help me prepare for these roles to be both competitive as well as to interview well for them. And so I think, yep, so that was kind of why veterans make great product managers in about 20 minutes or so. What are your questions?
I have a question, Mike.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Let me introduce myself. My name is Floyd Goodwin. I was noticing on the circle that the product manager is actually in as far as who he interacts with. And I noticed that there was no type of trend assessment as a quality that they should have, that person should have when interacting with, because you interact with so many different groups.
So are you thinking in terms of business trends, market trends, or just kind of trend assessment in general?
Trend assessment in general for this, because you look like you actually have to have the ability to wear many hats in order to interact with various people. That requires you to also, when you talk about collaboration, you're building rapport with these different groups that you're interacting with. Lots of times when you're at that vantage point that you mentioned in your demonstration here, you have to have some type of trend assessment about yourself, where you're actually able to recognize a problem, but also be able to get the right people involved with it in order to resolve it at a given time before it actually costs your group or your team or your organization as a whole money.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's a great point. So there's a number of different ways, and like I said, this was just one example of a cross-functional team. It really depends by organizations. For some organizations, they'll have more of the analysts available for you to also work with. In other cases, you may have to be that analyst, which is why remember the previous slide talks about the importance of being able to be comfortable with data. It can be challenging because doing trend analysis on top of everything else can be difficult in terms of bandwidth and what you have available. But you're absolutely right. That is a critical skill, or to have somebody on the team that's really that can help through that.
Right. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, it's Renee Roth. I appreciate your taking the time tonight to present this. I had a question. You talked about being a lifelong learner. I think that applies to the idea of being adaptable. What suggestions or recommendations would you have for people to continue that lifelong learning? I know product management, project management, there's a certification out there for that. And some companies will have particular curriculum for their people. What is your recommendation for individuals to keep up with that adaptability and their own personal path or transit toward keeping up with their career and their viability, I guess I would say, for future employment?
So that's a great question, and a great place to start is actually taking a look at market trends and trying to kind of anticipate where's the market heading. For example, the market, if you look at some of the job reports out there, They talk about an increasing number of positions that are related to artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things. These are some examples of areas that I could take, not only for accreditation and certification, but also just taking some general purpose classes. So Coursera offers a number of different courses that you can do that. And then there's others, there's a lot of other providers too. I'm just saying, for one example is Coursera.
Mike, can I say something about Coursera?
Yeah, please.
We're offering that for free to people right now. State of Minnesota is paying the bill.
And I took you up on that offer too.
So, yeah, use that. It's college credits from major institutions.
It is one of the best ways online right now, especially if you're in transition, you absolutely should be doing some sort of online learning to increase your skills, to increase your knowledge, and to make yourself more competitive. And this this does vary from industry to industry and position to position, but really being willing to take, you don't have to necessarily commit to a 6-month or a 2-year degree. It might be just a 6-week, course in order to be able to understand that topic a little bit better. But a good way to take a look at it is what does the market need? It might be also what am I interested in? But really to make it most fruitful is, does what I'm interested in also match what is the market's looking for? Because maybe I love doing underwater basket weaving, but that's not necessarily going to feed Mama Pavek.
I had a question going back to the trend analysis. How do you separate correlation from causation? How can you tell a difference?
So that's like one of those ones that everybody gets wrong, right? Correlation doesn't necessarily equate to causation. And so ultimately in some of this, and so if we're talking from an engineering standpoint, you're doing something like a root cause analysis in order to determine. So say your machine or your software is not working right, then you do a root cause analysis to kind of walk the dog through it. And there's various different forms of root cause analysis, from everything from a fishbone to 5 whys to all different ways to figure out why something's not working. It gets trickier when you're starting to look at market trends and other things. So for example, we lowered our price, but yet we're still not selling more. Why is that? Or we lowered our price and we are selling a bunch more, so therefore that this product is heavily focused on price to a price-sensitive customer, when in fact that might not be the case. So really, the challenge with correlations and causations, causation is always a little bit trickier to determine. Correlation is kind of not that hard to find, but the right correlations are tricky to find. And so some of that takes, what I found for myself is sometimes it takes more than just one person involved in that conversation to give ourselves several different points of view to help determine the causation, whether we're talking about something good or something bad.
Okay, and I suppose like market familiarity will play into when like I've seen this do this and something else always does that when that happens.
Yep. And
I'm approaching this from an accounting standpoint, so I'd probably be doing market analysis rather than software failures. But
right. And I mean, but on the financial side, there's a whole bunch of things. Sometimes it's just how we're doing the accounting. We thought that we were going to save a bunch of money, and then we didn't because the way we accounted for our activities, our project activities. So there's a lot of stuff that goes in there. And as a product manager, you have to get familiar enough with all that. So one thing that I've had to learn is a lot of the financials. I knew the business side in terms of business strategy and product market fit and these types of things, but a lot of my financial tools and analysis was something new that I had to kind of work my way through because I didn't come from a P&L background, and most veterans don't.
The cost accounting and the variance analysis, yeah, I could see that being new.
Yep, exactly.
The one thing that's always very consistent about trend analysis is that the data is always there. Whether you recognize it to have value or not, that to me by itself is probably the guessing game that goes along with it. I had a problem with a company that I used to work with a long time ago, and the only way that you identified it as being a problem was the fact that the problem occurred every day at the same time. Everybody else overlooked it because there was nothing there to say anything's wrong. but just by the fact of how often do you have something that has human interaction happens every day at the same time. That by itself was a reason to actually look at it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And in fact, while we're talking about data, you know, another big field that's out there is data itself, data science and all these areas. Another good area to work on and take a look at too. But it's definitely interesting because you can have a million data points and then the challenge is trying to make the right picture and connect the right dots.
Yeah, I suppose there's always the garbage in, garbage out factor you have to take into account. But yeah, as long as you've got the data and you look at it right, you can usually find out a lot.
Definitely.
Looking at that, you know, the scenario, the problem happens every day at the exact same time. That says to me it's a software thing, not a person issue, because people are going to always vary by, you know, a few minutes. They aren't going to get it right to the minute every day. So that's my personal take.
Great points. Other questions or comments?
Mike,
I have
oh,
go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Mike, I have a question because you really made all of this so clear in such a simple way, and I really appreciate that. I'm thinking about, you know, veterans who are in transition, and what they do know is that they don't want to do what their MOS was. And they maybe have some of these skills. You know, they have the KSAs, but, you know, do they ever say, God, you know, I'm so passionate about product management. You know, it's been my dream. But what would someone really say if, you know, they're exploring? What would the thing that we would be listening for if we wanted to say, hey, you know, let's explore product management for you? What would those things be that we would be listening for, they would be saying?
So I think some of the personality or some of the things that a product manager would be interested in, or somebody coming into the product management it would be interested in, is one, how are things made, and two, how do they match the customers. So one of the things when I started actually my business degree back a couple years ago, before I joined the Army, the reason I wanted to get into the business world was I was really excited by the fact that in the business world, you have competing companies putting out their products, doing the best job they can, and trying to make them appeal to the customers. And then it was a competition of who wins. And that was what kind of led me after the Army, kind of led me back into a product management background or positions, was because I really enjoyed that competition of trying to match our products against our competitors' products and then trying and then winning. So if you kind of, so in terms of like, if you like doing that kind of stuff, that's, you know, one piece. If you just like to see how the kind of the market itself and you find it fascinating, you know, then that's another. And then on the technology side, so a lot of us, a bunch of us are gadget geeks, you know, and we always take a look and say, I wonder what kind of feature Apple is going to come out with, and then wonder what kind of feature Google will come out with after that, you know, to match them. Or on cars, I loved, you know, you love to watch, say, Tesla versus all the other EVs trying to compete. If that kind of stuff kind of really interests you, if you find yourself buying Car and Driver magazine, for example, and you like both the mechanical side as well as seeing and comparing the different companies, that actually is kind of pointing you into a product management type position.
So curiosity is part of it.
Yep.
And that business piece or that technical piece. Thanks. That's a great answer. Thank you.
One thing I was going to point out, if you're looking for specific jobs and what the trends are in that, go to the DEED website. We have some analytics that can help you find which jobs are in demand and which types of products that you could be a product manager for.
Great point. And a great tool.
Yes, it can help a lot.
Any other questions?
Stephen, do you have a link that you can put in the chat for that? I'll take that as a no.
Happy birthday to the Navy today.
Sorry, Alan, I was typing. I had put myself on mute.
Hello.
I'm just wondering, Stephen, if you can put a link to the occupations in demand in the chat.
Hey, Mike, I got a question for you really quick.
Yeah.
You said that you had a book, or maybe you were just saying like you put out enough information on it, but using your background for a stronger background in product management. Maybe I heard it wrong. Did you say you had like some additional information on using your military background and you applying that towards product management?
Okay, yeah. So I mean, so for me, my personal because I was doing some did product management in the military, so that was it made that transition easier. And particularly for my situation, because I was I had a modeling and simulation background, and the company that MTS is a modeling and simulation company. It was kind of one of those purple squirrel type, unique fits that worked out well. But that's not the only way that you could get coming out of the military, into a product management background. So we talked about kind of some of the general skills. Now there are some specific ones too, depending. So if you got an IT background, that kind of helps you, because a lot of product management positions are software based. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But also if you have a mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, pretty much engineering backgrounds, lend themselves well as design backgrounds. So whether we're talking about graphic design, because there's product management positions for companies that do graphic design and graphic production work, and art and everything else. So really it's kind of, you do need, if you have some sort of set of technical skills, it does help you out a lot.
Thanks, Mike.
And I'll send out these slides, or Alan and I will talk about how to disseminate the slides as well, so you guys can take a look at and reference them. And if you have any specific questions too, if you want to do a one-on-one, just reach out to me and let me know. And I'd be happy to kind of go over your background and take a look even in terms of some positions at some companies and networking and all those types of connections and preparation steps that we can do.
Well, and don't forget, this will be on YouTube later as well, on our YouTube channel.
And it'll be on YouTube. That's why I dressed up today.
So you can look for Eagle Group of Minnesota Veterans on YouTube and find all the past presentations, including this one.
As well as the one we did on analyzing business sectors, as well as the one we also did on Form 10Ks. So all those pieces, happy to help, and they're out there.
So real quickly, for those of you that are regular attendees and you have a profession that you want to cover, like Mike did, we'd like to invite you to scroll back up through chat and look for the Sign Up Genius link and sign up for a presentation slot so that you can talk to other vets who are looking and interested at careers. I'm looking at you, Mike Warren, on QA. So just saying, for folks that want to learn more about different career options in the civilian sector, this is going to be a great series that we can post on YouTube and refer people back to it. Thank you very much, Mike, for taking the time to do this. I appreciate it. That was fantastic. Super well informed as always, so much appreciated. And at this point, I'm going to stop the recording